At approximately 1300 hours on February 3, 2026, the master of the tanker Stena Imperative noticed unusual movement on the horizon. Through his binoculars, he identified 6 fast Iranian attack boats racing forward in a tight V formation, pointed directly at his vessel. The tanker carried an American flag, a U.S. crew, and a chemical cargo worth millions. The approach speed was extreme. These were not patrol boats drifting nearby. They were charging with intent. Within seconds, tension filled the bridge as the captain realized this was not routine monitoring. This was an intercept in progress. Each of the approaching boats was heavily armed, fitted with mounted heavy machine guns, and packed with personnel. Their speed reportedly exceeded 70 knots, far faster than most commercial vessels could maneuver away from. The radio suddenly came alive with a sharp transmission in accented English ordering the tanker to stop engines and prepare for boarding. The tone was not advisory. It was commanding. The captain faced a split-second decision: comply and risk seizure, or continue forward and call for help. He chose resistance, increased throttle, and immediately contacted the United States Fifth Fleet Watch Center. Instead of slowing down, the tanker accelerated and held course toward open Arabian sea routes. Behind it, the attack boats tightened formation. Armed commandos were visible on deck, positioning gear and ladders clearly meant for boarding operations. They were now only meters from the stern. No warning shots were fired, but the threat was unmistakable. This was no routine inspection attempt. It looked like a coordinated hijacking effort. Crew members could see faces, weapons, and hand signals between the Iranian teams as they prepared to close distance and latch onto the hull. The Iranian boats executed multiple aggressive high-speed passes, testing angles and reaction time. During the closest approach, one gunboat moved alongside so near that tanker crew could see commandos gripping boarding ladders, ready to deploy. Overhead, an Iranian surveillance drone circled, recording the encounter from above. A second radio order came through Emergency Maritime Channel 16, repeating the demand: shut down engines immediately or face forced boarding. The message removed all ambiguity. This was coercion under arms, happening in real time, with cameras watching and weapons ready. Position data later confirmed the tanker was operating in internationally recognized transit waters near Omani territory, outside Iranian legal authority. Under maritime law, forced boarding there would be unlawful. But legality offers little comfort when armed boats are seconds away from grappling range. The bridge crew understood that rules and conventions would not physically stop rifles or ropes. Only distance, speed, or intervention could. The captain maintained course and speed, betting everything on rapid naval response. It was a calculated risk, and it would determine whether the ship sailed free or was captured. That gamble paid off. Within roughly 6 minutes, a U.S. Navy destroyer, USS McFall, appeared at high speed, moving directly into the engagement area. Fighter aircraft provided air cover overhead, shifting the balance instantly. The Iranian boats hesitated, broke formation, and then withdrew north toward their bases. The entire confrontation lasted only 17 minutes, yet those minutes represented one of the most serious attempted seizures of a U.S.-flagged commercial vessel in recent years. A boarding attempt had been underway, and only rapid military presence stopped it from succeeding. What made the encounter especially significant was timing and scale. Iran had effectively tested whether it could seize an American-flagged ship under U.S. naval protection without triggering immediate escalation. That represented a dangerous threshold. It was not random harassment. It looked structured, rehearsed, and deliberate. Analysts later concluded the maneuver pattern suggested a pre-planned operation rather than spontaneous interception. The message was strategic. Iran was willing to challenge shipping security directly, even under the shadow of American warships operating nearby. Earlier that same day, hundreds of miles away, another confrontation had already raised alarms. An Iranian drone reportedly approached the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln on a direct and aggressive flight path. According to U.S. command reporting, repeated radio warnings were ignored as the drone continued closing distance. Once it crossed the carrier's defensive boundary, engagement became mandatory under standing rules. A carrier-launched stealth fighter intercepted the drone at range and destroyed it with a single missile, preventing any chance of closer surveillance or potential attack. That aerial intercept confirmed what intelligence agencies had suspected for weeks. Iranian forces were actively probing defenses, response times, and engagement protocols. These were not isolated incidents, but structured tests. Each approach measured reaction speed, communication flow, and weapons deployment timing. Military planners interpret such probes as preparation behavior, reconnaissance ahead of possible escalation. The drone shoot-down showed American readiness, while the tanker boarding attempt showed Iranian willingness to push limits. Together, the pattern suggested coordinated pressure rather than coincidence. The timing added even more weight to the events. Both incidents occurred just days before scheduled diplomatic talks between American and Iranian officials in Oman. That overlap raised immediate questions among defense observers. Were these actions meant as leverage before negotiations, or signals of internal factions acting independently? Either way, the operational message was unmistakable. Tensions at sea were rising, and restraint was being tested. When military signaling increases right before diplomacy begins, it often means both sides are negotiating from positions backed by visible force. Within 48 hours of the maritime confrontation, U.S. authorities released a formal maritime security advisory addressing the growing risk in and around the Strait of Hormuz and nearby sea lanes. The wording was technical and measured, but the warning was serious. American-flagged commercial vessels were told they could face hailing, diversion attempts, detention, or even seizure by Iranian forces. Such advisories are not issued lightly. They reflect evaluated threat patterns, not rumors. For shipping companies and captains, the message translated into one clear reality. Transiting these waters now carried elevated operational and legal danger. The advisory included specific behavioral guidance for shipmasters. If contacted by Iranian units, crews were instructed to identify their vessel, confirm their flag state, and state they were operating under international navigation rights. If a boarding request was made, captains were advised to decline when it was safe to do so. However, if armed personnel boarded anyway, crews were told not to resist physically to avoid loss of life. This careful wording highlighted a difficult balance. Assert legal rights, but do not turn a confrontation into a firefight aboard a civilian ship. One recommendation stood out above the rest. U.S.-flagged vessels were urged to remain as far away from Iranian territorial waters as navigation safety allowed. Eastbound ships were encouraged to hug the Omani side of the transit corridor. Though not labeled an exclusion zone, the operational effect was similar. It informally shifted traffic patterns and acknowledged that risk was now uneven across the strait. When a government quietly advises its ships to avoid half a waterway, it signals that threat levels are no longer theoretical. They are active and being managed in real time. Geographically, the Strait of Hormuz is narrow, with tightly defined shipping lanes designed to keep traffic flowing safely in both directions. Recommending that vessels bias toward one side effectively compresses usable space and increases congestion risk. It also acknowledges that parts of the waterway are contested in practice, even if not in law. For navigators, that means tighter margins and less flexibility. For insurers and risk analysts, it means recalculating exposure models. Maritime safety is built on predictability, and any shift away from predictable routing introduces new layers of vulnerability. For U.S. Navy commanders in the region, the advisory marked a shift in mission emphasis. Presence and deterrence were no longer enough. Active protection of commercial traffic became central. Multiple destroyers equipped with advanced combat systems were assigned to patrol and escort roles. These ships can track hundreds of air and surface targets simultaneously and carry layered missile defenses for different threat types. Their crews train for high-intensity combat scenarios, not just patrol duty. Escorting civilian shipping through tense waters demands constant readiness and leaves little room for operational error. Alongside destroyer patrols, specialized vessels were tasked with mine countermeasure duties. That assignment suggested planners considered the possibility that naval mines could be deployed if tensions escalated further. Mine warfare is disruptive and relatively low cost, yet it can shut down major shipping routes. Countermeasure ships use sonar, remotely operated vehicles, and diver teams to detect and neutralize underwater explosives. Their presence is both precaution and signal. It tells observers that threat assessments include worst-case disruption scenarios, not just harassment by fast boats or drones. Air support planning also increased. Attack aircraft known for low-altitude strike capability conducted exercises with naval units in Gulf waters. These aircraft are designed to engage small, fast surface targets and can remain overhead for extended periods, providing persistent coverage. Public release of exercise footage served a signaling purpose. It demonstrated that naval escorts would not operate alone. They would be backed by rapid response air power. In deterrence strategy, visibility matters. Showing capability in advance can sometimes prevent its use by convincing an adversary the cost would be immediate and severe. Meanwhile, a carrier strike group remained positioned in the broader region, functioning as a mobile airbase at sea. Such a group brings dozens of aircraft, electronic warfare platforms, helicopters, and layered defenses, supported by thousands of personnel. A nuclear-powered carrier can operate for long periods without refueling, giving planners flexibility. It does not rely on host nation airfields that might become politically restricted. However, carriers are high-value assets. Their strength lies in reach and air power, but their protection requires constant coordination with escort ships and airborne surveillance. Recent drone encounters highlighted a modern challenge: cost imbalance in defensive warfare. Relatively inexpensive unmanned aircraft can force defenders to use far more expensive interceptor missiles. Even when every intercept succeeds, the exchange ratio favors the attacker economically. Large numbers of cheap drones can strain defensive magazines and attention spans. Reloading missiles at sea is complex and time-consuming. This creates a strategic puzzle: how to maintain airtight defense without exhausting resources. It is a reminder that technological superiority does not automatically solve asymmetric pressure tactics. Combat system officers aboard escort ships understand how tight these margins can become. Detection must happen early, classification must be accurate, and engagement decisions must be fast. Advanced interceptors can defeat high-speed threats, but only if tracking and authorization align in seconds. Swarms, low-flying profiles, or coordinated attacks compress reaction time even further. Human judgment works alongside automated recommendations, and stress levels rise with every ambiguous contact. In such an environment, training and discipline are critical, yet everyone knows that saturation tactics are designed specifically to test those limits. Senior naval leadership publicly addressed the growing tension, emphasizing that U.S. forces maintained a strong overall capability advantage in the region. Officials pointed to past long-range strike operations as proof that complex targets could be reached and destroyed when ordered. The reassurance was meant to steady both sailors and allies. Still, capability does not automatically equal control of outcomes. Geography, political limits, and escalation risks shape every engagement decision. Commanders must weigh not only whether they can strike, but what happens the day after. Strength deters, but it also raises the stakes of every move. Rules of engagement given to commanders in the transit corridor reflected that balance. They were directed to defend American vessels and crews, maintain freedom of navigation, and avoid escalation unless survival required it. That final clause, necessity, leaves room for judgment under pressure. Officers at sea may have only seconds to interpret intent and act. A radar lock, a sudden turn, or a weapons display can change the legal and tactical picture instantly. Modern naval confrontations rarely begin with declared battle. They begin with ambiguous signals that must be interpreted correctly the first time. Information warfare also moved quickly after the incidents. Iranian state media outlets portrayed encounters at sea as defensive successes, highlighting footage of their patrol boats near foreign ships while omitting withdrawal moments in legal context. Such framing supports domestic narratives of strength and sovereignty. In tightly controlled media environments, perception often matters more than detail. External audiences may see de-escalation. Domestic viewers may see victory. Competing narratives become part of the strategic contest, shaping public tolerance for risk and government freedom of action on both sides of the standoff. Diplomatic talks scheduled in Oman were widely viewed as a potential off-ramp from escalation. Negotiators were set to discuss nuclear limits, missile programs, and sanctions, issues that have resisted resolution for decades. Each side entered with firm red lines and political constraints at home. Broad agreements require trade-offs, and trade-offs invite criticism. While diplomats prepared meeting agendas, military planners prepared contingencies. That dual track is common in high-risk disputes: dialogue on one channel, deterrence on another. Progress in one can calm the other, but failure can also inflame it. Regional military positioning continued alongside diplomacy. Reports indicated that missile assets and other strategic systems were being moved to hardened or underground facilities, a classic survivability measure. Hardening protects retaliatory capability and signals that planners are thinking about worst-case scenarios. From a defensive standpoint, it is rational preparation. From an adversary's viewpoint, it can look like escalation readiness. Security dilemmas often work this way. One side's precaution appears to the other side as intent. Misreading those signals has triggered crises before, which is why intelligence monitoring becomes constant and detailed. Beyond military risk, the economic dimension loomed large. A significant share of global energy shipments passes through the narrow strait each day. Even temporary disruption can move prices worldwide within hours. Shipping firms faced rising insurance costs, stricter underwriting, and difficult routing choices. Avoiding the corridor entirely adds weeks and major expense to voyages. Continuing through it accepts higher security risk. Companies make these decisions using probability models, but models can break when behavior changes suddenly. Markets react not only to events, but to the fear of what might happen next. Sustaining continuous naval escorts is also resource-intensive. Warships consume large amounts of fuel and require replenishment at sea from support vessels, which themselves must be protected. Crews rotate through demanding watch schedules, and fatigue accumulates faster under threat conditions than in routine patrols. Logistics chains stretch across oceans to keep a small number of ships on station. Over time, more assets are tied up supporting the mission than performing frontline tasks. This is the hidden weight of prolonged tension. Readiness is maintained, but at steadily rising operational cost. Security monitoring centers tracked incident patterns across the region, logging hails, approaches, and boarding attempts. Analysts observed that activity levels often rose during diplomatic friction and eased when talks showed progress. That pattern suggested calibrated pressure rather than random behavior. Commercial captains shared practical knowledge through informal networks, which patrol zones were most assertive, which radio responses reduced friction, which maneuvers discouraged close approach. Such adaptation helps ships stay safe, but it also shows how repeated pressure can normalize abnormal behavior, gradually shifting what operators consider routine. Inside defense planning staffs, scenario teams examined escalation ladders step by step. What if a vessel were successfully seized? What if a rescue failed? What if retaliation spread beyond the immediate area through allied groups or proxy forces? Each branch created new complications. No plan guaranteed clean outcomes. The same exercise occurred on the other side. Counter scenarios built around strikes, sanctions, and regional responses. Both sets of planners aimed to prevent surprise and preserve options. Yet the more detailed the war games became, the clearer one truth appeared. Conflict paths are easier to start than stop. As days passed, commercial traffic continued moving through contested waters under watchful escort. Radar screens stayed crowded, crews stayed alert, and every unusual contact drew extra scrutiny. Most transits ended quietly, which is exactly how stability survives, one uneventful passage at a time. But elevated tension changes how every signal is read and every maneuver is judged. The margin for miscalculation narrows. Whether diplomacy ultimately reduces the pressure or incidents accumulate toward crisis depends on decisions still ahead. For now, ships keep sailing, escorts keep watch, and restraint remains the most important weapon in use.